Ben asked me to come and talk to you this morning specifically about the area of heating and how we can lower the carbon impact and indeed try to reduce it completely to zero, the carbon impact of the heating in our churches. That is partly because the heating, the carbon footprint of our heating in our churches tends to be the biggest contribution that, for most of us, most of our churches, it's the biggest contribution to our carbon footprint. It is also because it tends to be quite intimidating, can be quite difficult for us to tackle, and indeed it's the area which, if we're honest, I think quite a lot of us think, I don't really want to think about that because it's too difficult. And partly as a because I absolutely feel for that way of thinking about things, I went earlier this year in the summer to a one-day conference in London about heating heritage buildings, and I gleaned quite a lot of useful information from that. And it was partly as a result of that Ben has asked me to share some of this stuff with you this morning, not least because I came away from that conference rather more encouraged about the issues around heating in our churches, and perhaps better, well, definitely better prepared to kind of apply my mind to how we might deal with this issue. And I suppose, as I say, this was a one-day conference on the subject of the conference was not just heating churches, it was heating heritage buildings. And the conference had been put together by a joint kind of project between the Church of England and the National Trust. And the National Trust have done a great deal of very good work with greening the heating in many of the heritage buildings that they have control of. And in many ways, I think it could be said that they're quite a long way further down the road with this kind of thing than we are in the churches, and there's a lot we can learn from them. But it's the heritage buildings thing that is common to both groups, because of course the majority of the buildings that we inhabit as churches, that we use as churches, the majority of the buildings that the Church of England owns are indeed heritage buildings. Many of them are listed grade 2 star or grade 1. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, what the proportion is of church buildings through Truro Diocese that are listed either 2 star or 1, but it'll be a very significant majority, a very high percentage of them. And my guess would be that nearly all of you are dealing with a problem of trying to heat a building that has got heritage status of some sort, and also has been, it has got fabric that was really not designed to be heated in the way that we might like, or indeed have been traditionally heating them. So there's a whole range of issues that are common to heritage buildings generally, and it was that I was really trying to get hold of. And as I say, I came back feeling rather more encouraged than I might have been when I went there. The headline kind of message that came across to myself and the other delegates is that, and I quote, "It is possible to reduce the carbon emissions to net zero in any heritage building using today's technology whilst still keeping sufficient levels of thermal comfort. It can be done." And I think a lot of, that's perhaps the first hurdle we have to get over, because we look at this problem and we see most of our churches, the heating will be oil or possibly gas. The chances are, if you're off the gas grid, you'll be on oil heating. I suppose it's possible you might be on LPG cylinders. And that sort of heating is, you know, you look at it and you think, well, what on earth are we going to do and how are we going to deal with it? And the problem can become really quite can loom really quite large. And as I say, I came away realizing that the technology exists here and now. We don't need to wait for new technology to come, although the technology is developing, but it's there to do it now. Of course, there are cost implications, and I'll say a bit more about that later on. But I think that the whole kind of zeitgeist of the conference was that it can be done, and I found that very encouraging. So I'll talk a little bit later on about the possibility, about what the various possible technologies that one might end up using in your church or in various churches, what the technologies might be. But first of all, just to sort of backtrack a little bit, most of you, in fact, I think all of you will know about the net zero 2030. Obviously there's the commitment, and that there is now the route map to net zero 2030. I'm not going to go through this particular document. I think I may have spoken to you about it already, but I'm not going to go through it now. But that is about how do we actually get from where we are now to where we need to be, which is basically a zero emissions place. And I suppose there are some key principles that we need to kind of take on board as we go, if we're going to kind of take this journey to net zero seriously. And I think I'm probably will need at this stage, I think I'll share a screen now. So let me just see, where can I find, I think it's that one I need. And then, oh, go away, I don't want that. That's the one. There is a great deal of help and information available to us all through the Church of England, environment website. This is well, you can see that what I'll do is I'll put together just a list of all these various links, but basically they are all on this net zero carbon church section of the Church of England environment pages on the internet. And there's a stack of information on here that helps us to understand what the issues are, and lots of nice little interactive diagrams about how we can do things and so on, all of which is very well worth looking at. But you need to scroll down a little bit and see where where things are at the moment. One of the things that has been said and that you often hear people say is, oh, we can't change this and we can't change that because the DAC won't give us a faculty, and they, you know, we won't get permission to do it. In July this year, the faculty guidance was changed, and it is now the case that all DACs, when they are considering a faculty for anything that might have carbon emission implications, they are now obliged to consider the effect that the proposals that they're being asked to consider will have on carbon emissions. And they also need to be assured that the parish that's making the application has actually made an assessment of the the carbon, you know, what the carbon consequences would be for the particular thing that they are considering. So what you've got here on the screen there's obviously a variety of things here, and I'll open one of these up in a minute, but within the heating kind of area, we're going to have a look, we'll have a look at the principles that parishes need to be considering. But one of the things that's really kind of important is that actually DACs are now required to, so if you don't consider this stuff when you are making an application, perhaps to do something to your heating system, the DAC, if they're obeying the rules, should then come back to you and say, have you done an assessment as to what the carbon implications of this proposal is? And how can you just, if it's going to increase your carbon emissions, you'll need to be able to justify it. And I know from conversations I've had that Truro Diocese's DAC has quite a number of people on there who are personally very sympathetic to the whole call to get to net zero, and they will be on the case. They'll be on the case for parishes who are making applications which might increase carbon emissions. That will be, you know, that might be a reason for turning a faculty application down. Similarly, if you're making an application which will reduce carbon emissions, they may require some more details. They may want you they may want to make sure that you've done all the proper considerations, but actually it will be regarded very sympathetically. So as far as our DAC in Truro Diocese is concerned, really people need to make contact and need to ask the question, and not make the assumption that because they're the DAC, they're automatically going to say no. Now, let's just have a quick look at this practical path to net zero carbon for churches first, because this is the place to start. Many of you will have seen this document before, I'm sure. I'm not going to go through it piece by piece, but all of these things that are on the screen there are things that are relatively easy to do and relatively inexpensive to do, and in terms of how we use our heating in our churches are things that are important. So things like good maintenance, making sure that there are no cracks in the windows, making sure that damp is not getting in, because that will tend to cool the building down, and insulating heating pipes so that the heat goes where you want it to, draft exclusion, possibly double glazing or secondary double glazing where you can put it. I mean, if you've a big stained glass window, that might be more difficult, although even that is doable, but it's expensive. And certainly insulating round doors and that kind of thing. These are all things that are fairly simple, fairly straightforward, fairly obvious, which can be done basically using the most efficient way possible. The other thing that is probably not on that list somewhere, oh, well, I suppose it is, matching heating settings better to usage. Make sure that you've got the controls of the heating in your church really set to the most efficient settings. Possibly turn it down a degree or so, but that will depend a little bit on your congregations. Possibly turn your heating on later and turn it off earlier over the winter. I mean, most of us are going to have to be kind of driven to doing that anyway this year because of the cost of energy. But it's obviously going to cut our carbon footprint quite a bit by doing that as well. And certainly optimizing the settings for the controlling of your heating is another thing that can be done. Doesn't cost any money, just means somebody's got to go in there and apply their brain to it. There may also be some radiators you can turn off. I mean, it says there, turn off the heating 15 minutes before the service ends. Again, that comes under the same heading of optimizing your settings. Yeah, I mean, obviously make sure that the heating is not on at times when it doesn't necessarily need to be on. and I'll go now. So that's this thing, and this document then takes you through various what to do next, and then a few more kind of slightly more advanced things: double glazing, secondary glazing, internally insulating walls, and so on. One of the things I am going to say is that, and perhaps talk about a little bit more, is that it's really important to get proper professional advice. It is now possible to get to have a heating or energy audit done through parish buying. So whoever it is who's got parish buying access in your parish, it's worth their while going onto the parish buying website and having a look to see whether the energy you can pay to have an energy audit done for your church. It costs somewhere between £200 and £450, I think. And I suspect, therefore, that it's mostly a desktop exercise with perhaps a questionnaire or something in the background, but I don't really know very much about it. But it can be done. The diocese is also hoping to get on board, probably early next year sometime, I suspect, somebody who attached to the diocese, who again can help churches with advice about the sort of stuff that you've got under C and indeed D on this list. So when it says they all require professional advice, including input from your DAC, yes, they definitely do. But this is, and it may be that the first step is for the PCC to say, yes, we're prepared to pay for an energy audit. But after you've done that, then there will be other professional advice. We hope there will be some funding available to help people to pay for either the professional advice or indeed to help people to apply for grants to actually do the work. Because clearly, if you're talking about putting in a new heating system, this is something that is going to be very expensive. But there should be grant funding available. I mean, I'm talking about government funding here, but many of us don't always know how to apply for that sort of funding. And again, the diocese is in the process of hopefully again next year we should have somebody available who can give parishes advice on how they might apply for funding to do these various tasks. So there's a lot of help out there. And that again was something I brought back from the conference that I went to in the summer, that actually we don't have to do all this stuff on our own. We need to ask the relevant people, ask the DAC, ask our diocesan environment officers, and when we've got them in post, ask our net zero advisor officer or our fundraising advisor officer to help us to, what's the first step, what's the next step that we do. So there's plenty of help either available already or coming down the road. As you're doing one of the things, or a couple of other documents on this website here that are useful for people to look at. One is this document about a heating options appraisal, and this basically starts you off on how you might assess yourself, or a group of you better, how churches might begin to assess what we need from our heating systems. Now, I'm not going to go through all this in a great detail, but one of the key things, I suppose, one of the key principles that people have not really taken on board as yet, as far as heating churches is concerned, is that you should heat the people and not the space. We heat the people and not the building. And when I come to show you one or two pictures of possible technologies, that you'll see perhaps what that means. But one of the ways, that one of the places to start with this is to actually get together with a small group and actually say to yourselves, what do we actually want our heating system to do? Yes, we want it to heat the people, but how often, how many people, are those people who are moving around? What sort of plant have we got in our church? Have we got pews that are fixed to the floor, or have we got chairs that keep getting moved about every other week? How many people do we have? How often do we have people in the church, and so on? Now, all of this document will kind of help to guide you through this process. So who are you heating? What type of event? When are you heating them? Where are you heating them? And which parts of the building fabric need special care? Because if you're going to change the heating regime in your church, certainly if it's a heritage building, you will need professional advice, because changing the heating regime may have an effect on the fabric, and that's why we need to have the advice of professionals. So this document kind of takes you through, here you are, here's a typical sort of plan that somebody's made in terms of what sort of use is made of the church, when, how often, and so on. And then it takes you through a framework and a little there's a little table here of the sorts of things you might be considering. And you see along the top, we've got oil boilers and gas boilers, which are by far and away the most common types of heating in many of our rural churches at the moment. And as we go across to the right, there is an electric boiler or other kinds of electric heating. An electric heating, remember, is only carbon neutral if you're getting your electricity from 100% renewable source. If your electricity is brown, then your electric heating is not green. Heat pumps, again, running on electricity, and biomass boiler, which I will say a little bit more about in a moment. And there's a little sort of tick chart here to show the sorts of different variations that there might be. This is very detailed, and I don't think it's I haven't got time to go through it fully, but what you'll end up with is a whole you know, one of these at least, others perhaps will apply to a greater or lesser extent. Maybe your church has got a combination of these situations, but these are examples of the sorts of things that sorts of issues that there are at the moment, and the sorts of low carbon options that one might consider. Okay, let me just go back to this one. I'll just have a quick look at one of the other diagrams on this, one of the other reports on this page, and then I'll stop sharing and we'll have a little pause and see if anybody got any questions. This is perhaps, actually, I've done this in slightly the wrong order. This is a document, does what it says on the tin, church heating principles, and yes, it's a very full kind of document. I've skated over some of this, but it covers some of the stuff I've already talked about. Don't waste energy, optimize the system, and so on. Consider how the space is used, and so on. I think most of this is stuff that I've just focused on or have mentioned in the last few minutes. But again, I draw your attention to point 10 here. Consultation is vital. I suppose the only other thing that's worth perhaps mentioning before I pause, getting to this future will take time and can only move at the pace feasible for each church. There is no push, no encouragement really. Nobody is asking churches to rip out their existing perfectly good functional oil or gas boilers. There's no suggestion, in fact, that the church, you know, one of the actual carbon saving things is to keep your existing system going for as long as you can, for as long as it's efficient. So again, that's a common misconception. People thinking, well, you know, if we're going to do this, we've only just installed a new boiler. It's going to last for the next 20 years. Are they asking us to take it out? No, nobody is asking you to do that. They're asking churches to be as efficient as they can with the energy, fossil fuel energy they do use. I suspect it might be the case that the price of fossil fuels, if it goes on going up, will actually drive people to want to make a change to a different sort of heating. But I think also, as part of the options appraisal, part of getting together a group to think about a decarbonisation plan for your church, one of the important things is to have a kind of plan in the ready, at the ready, so that when in the first week of December your existing oil-fired boiler suddenly blows up and doesn't work anymore, yes, all right, you can't have a new system installed by the third week in December, probably, but you need to have a plan in place so that a decision has been made that when this boiler gives up the ghost, we will go across to, for example, a ground source heat pump, and the exploration and the costings and everything for that have already been done, so that there is a zero carbon plan in place for when the existing boiler dies. Because otherwise what will happen is that the easiest option will be, in an emergency, we will replace like for like, and then suddenly you're back on the fossil fuel track forever. So creating a plan, a heat decarbonisation plan, is very much part of, is an important part of doing this whole process. Now I'm going to stop sharing there for a minute and just have a pause and ask if there are any questions on what I've said so far. Yeah, Miranda. No, you're on mute.
Yep, sorry. I'm not sure if it's a question or not. It's a comment.
That's fine.
Churches like ours at the moment, we've got just about nothing, and our heating is overheads, electric and rubbish, so we're replacing them. But the main thing is that we've got a big project to make the church fit for the 21st century and get it into community use, etc., etc. So when we're planning our new heating system, which we're in the middle of, it's really difficult to know what we're planning for, because at the moment, you know, we only have a service on a Sunday, a prayer group on a Tuesday, and occasional things. But we'd love to have the church full every day of the week with people using it from the community, and we're sort of a bit stuck on that one.
I mean, absolutely, and I can entirely understand you know, the issue. One of the things, I mean, when that in one of those documents that I was showing you, the options appraisal, you start by considering the use of your church. Now that one is making the assumption that you actually are identifying the ways in which your church building is used at the moment. Yeah. But if you've got plans to encourage the community to come in and use it more, then that needs to be factored into your, so if you want to be running a toddler group, or you want to have the schools in more, or you want to run a elderly people's lunch, or whatever it might be in the church, in the space of the church, that needs to be put into the factor for the new heating plan, because that will then mean that actually you're looking much more at a sort of continual heating, potentially a continual need for warmth in the church, rather than just warmth on a Sunday morning, for example. Yeah. So the way that you want to use the way that you use the building now, the way that you want to use the building in the future, that needs to come first before you then say, so what sort of kind of heating will actually fit the purpose here? Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, it's quite difficult, though, of course.
Yeah,
because
it is.
You get people saying, well, there's no, why do we spend money doing all that? Because we can't guarantee people will come. But that's the faith question.
I mean, it is, you need to have, so that's a whole parish plan or PCC plan as to how you're going to encourage, what are you going to do? Is there a demand out there in the wider community for the sorts of things that the church might be able to offer? What else are there? Other community buildings in your area that are offering the same thing or offering something similar? I mean, that's a whole individual context type question.
Yeah.
Ben.
I was just going to throw into the mix that we are looking at the moment about piloting some early church surveys for energy, usage, etc. So that's a conversation that I'm, as part of the church house team that I sit on as well, because we need some pilot churches, both large and small, to give us an idea so that we have some data, because we're going to need data to apply for funding from the central funds to be able to further this work. So I'm happy to have that conversation with people. But I will also say just a couple of things that dropped into my mind. There's a company called pewheating.com, and they work largely with a company called Kovo Schmidt, which is Kovo Schmidt, and they do a very good pew heating system. And you can buy a cushion at a time. You can buy a half pew at a time, and it's modular, so you can keep adding to it. So you don't have this huge outlay cost of having to go, oh, we must do the whole church. You can do the first 4 pews, see how you respond to it. And their system's very good because it heats when you sit on it. It's conductive rather than always on. So when you sit down, it turns on. When you stand up, it turns off. So there's some good options out there.
Yes, there are. And that was what I was going to carry on to talk about when we just had this little pause for questions, because just to have a bit of an overview of the sort of technologies that are out there. But yes, pew heating systems, absolutely important. Helen Jones,
So it is a very complicated business, this heating the churches, isn't it?
It is.
So who can you get this parish audit from?
That comes from Parish Buying have got a parish energy audit available now.
Okay.
I don't have I've been on the let me just have a quick look and see if I've still got the screen up. Because I looked at it this morning. Oh, how do I get rid of this thing? Like that. Heating principles, heating options, practical. I think it might be one of these. Oh yes, I've got it on. I know I've got it on my. Sorry, I knew I had a link to it somewhere. Let's try this one. That's it. Right. So if you go to the Parish Buying website, and here we are, register your interest for a subsidised energy audit. And then it says, how much will an audit cost? There are 100, I've no idea how far through they've got with this, 100 available, subsidised. The usual cost is £445. Qualifying churches receive a subsidy of £100, and then it'll tell you about, there's a whole lot more information here about the energy audits. How are they undertaken? Consumption, review of the building services and fabric, management practices, etc., etc. As I say, I suspect that it probably doesn't, at that price, probably doesn't include an actual site visit, but it would be they would look at your energy use figures, and you will then have to provide a plan and description and so on. But I might be wrong, maybe they provide things. But anyway, that's on the Parish Buying website. The link to this, I will send some links to things round. I'm not somebody who has access. It says log in or register to apply. I don't have access to that myself, so I can't go any further than that. But anyway, that's what I was talking about, really. Any other comments or questions? Sorry, Helen, was that the thing that you were?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
That's
the place to start, I think, and with gathering a group. I'll say a bit more about that again later. David.
What if you're the only one who's interested?
You have to try and get more people interested. I think it's very
You're
difficult to
just
do
a
it
little
on your own.
church of 20,
Yeah,
so it's not
yeah.
easy getting
No,
a
it isn't.
group.
It isn't. No.
So sometimes you've got to do it by yourself.
Yeah. David.
I do wonder if for some churches paying a few £100 for somebody else to do an audit might be overkill. Yeah, we're quite a simple church. We use electricity and oil, and I've got the bills, so I know how much we use. And okay, maybe I should be asking a few more questions, but I just wonder if we could all benefit from a self-audit tool, which would be free of charge, asking getting the treasurer to dig out a few bills.
Oh, well,
Because that's the kind of thing the auditors will do.
Yes. Yes.
I just wondered if there was a self-audit tool would be useful.
Well, in a way, the energy footprint tool does some of that for you, because if you fill in the energy footprint tool, you have to put in the figures about your annual usage and your floor area and your number of people who come through and all that kind of stuff. So, that's made a start on that. And my expectation would be that if you are paying for an audit, that they will do all that stuff for you, tell you where you are, but that I would have hoped and expected that they would also say to you, we have identified this, this and this that you could and should be doing, which are the things that you need to start to do, the next things you need to be doing in your particular context. In other words, it's an audit, but it is also leading you on to say, so what do you do next? If you've got somebody in your church who can do that, brilliant, that's excellent. By all means, don't spend the money to do it. But I think, nobody's saying that you have to spend the money, but there is something about having a professional, professionally produced document that I would think would be quite helpful if you were then going to say, well, look, we need to make this alteration for which we need a faculty, and you need to go to the DAC and apply for a faculty. If you've got a professionally produced document that says, this church needs this, and they may even give you an estimate of the amount of carbon it would save, then that would be helpful in terms of the application process. Now, that's my guess, I don't know, but if I was on the DAC, which I'm not, that's the kind of thing that I would be looking for. But if you've got the expertise in your church, great, go for it.
I wonder whether they're actually asking any more questions than are on the practical path to net zero document that you were talking about earlier.
That's
the combination of that document neatly filled out together with the energy footprint tool probably does the job. For me, the money, I'd rather spend money on the complicated solutions. The problem seems to me fairly obvious. It's the solutions are the harder thing. And I think the audit's just going to tell us the problems. It's not going to give us the solutions.
Well, I think that depends on the audit, and it depends on who the people are in your church. As I say, if you've got people in the church who can do that, that's great. But for many people, actually getting some kind of an accurate handle on how much energy we're using, that's not difficult. It's in the bills. It's where is the energy going, and what difference might it make if we did X, Y, or Z. That's the thing we need to handle. Miranda.
No, I was just going to agree with David. I think for us, we did look at that. We got as far as getting a quote, and we were going to ask them to do it. But for a small church, I'm sure David's absolutely right. It's really not worth paying the money. If you've got a small church and a fairly simple heating system, lighting, whatever, it's not going to do anything for you that you can't do yourself. So, but for a larger church with more complicated carbon footprint, then yes, it definitely would be worth it, I'm sure.
It depends on what you decide needs doing. One of the other things that I've already said, and I'll say again, is that if you are going to do something significant to the structure, to the fabric of your building, then you absolutely will have to have professional advice. If it's a heritage building, you have to have professional advice. The DAC will, if they'll look at it and say, where's your advice coming from for this? Who says that this will be, if you're going to change the heating regime fairly significantly, have you considered this, and this? And you do need professional advice for that. And if you've got a professional in your church, fine. But I think just ordinary Joe Blogs, frankly, I think they'll then send it back and say, we need to see a proper thing. Ben, and then I'll move on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I can hear mileage in a self-audit. And so just in that, as a first means, as a first going, an expanded EFT, but with some helpful prompts, not really very different from what we're doing with Eco Church and using their audit. It asks the questions that we may not have loaded in our mind, I suppose. Yeah. So I'll run with that centrally and just take that back into the National DEO network and see what appetite there is. But if we could create a relatively simple pro forma first audit, self-audit form that helps support the EFT and also give you the info you use and ask some helpful questions, I could see that could be a fruitful thing. So thank you for that suggestion. If you see it appear nationally, I stole it from you. Thank you.
Can I just interrupt a second, Ben? Yep. Anne Petty was part of this, but she somehow dropped out. Can somebody let her in again?
I will find her now. Yeah,
I've let her in, I think.
Is she in? Is she back?
Yes, she is now.
Yes, she should be back now.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Over to you, Elly.
Right. So having kind of set the scene in terms of that we actually need to organize ourselves and have a plan rather than doing a bit of this and a bit of that, and having made the point that we actually need to put a plan together, even if, firstly we need to do the small stuff that we can do, like cutting down the drafts and that kind of thing, but also we need to kind of look a bit more long term into the future. What sort of zero carbon technology might we be considering for use in our churches? And I will just screen share again. We are. There are basically there are, as I said at the beginning, there's nothing particularly new about any of the technologies that are now being put into churches, zero carbon technologies that are being put into churches. Nothing terribly new about any of them. So they are all sort of tried and tested. And certainly the received wisdom that I received from the conference is that it is it's possible to do it. We need to be actually doing this stuff and not waiting for, there's no point in trying to wait for other technology that'll come down the line. This is just a couple of pictures of under pew heaters. There's actually an enormous range of under pew heaters that are available now, and as Ben says, you can do it piecemeal. You don't have to do the whole church all at once, and you can install them in such a way that they can be switched on pew by pew. So if you've got some pews that are not occupied on a Sunday morning, you don't switch the heating on. You remember what I said about make sure you heat the people and not the space, not the building. And this is one of the ways to do it. The other thing that was what Ben was referring to, I think, which I haven't got a picture of, is a sort of heated cushion that you can just use and people can sit on. Again, that that heats the people and not the building. But the under pew heaters, or the sort of cushions that you sit on, would work in a building with chairs, of course, unless they're connected. I don't quite know how those would be connected to. If they need connecting to the mains, then that becomes more difficult with chairs to sit on. And certainly if you're in a building like, for example, in the cathedral, we don't have pews anywhere, we have chairs, so we couldn't use anything of this sort. But for many of our older churches, this absolutely would tick the box for most Sunday mornings, quite frankly. The other system that is very commonly used is the sort of infrared heaters that are wall mounted or mounted on pillars. Some of them are better than others. Some of them you do find that if you sit underneath them, you get your head fried off and your feet are still frozen. So there are some heaters where they give off heat, but it only becomes heat when it touches people. So again, there's an effect of heating the people, but not the space in between. Again, there's lots and lots of these kinds of things on the market, lots and lots of these things available. These, of course, it wouldn't matter if you're if you've got chairs rather than pews, but they'll only heat the area, either the edges of the church or round the pillars, wherever it is you can mount the heaters. But there's lots of them out there available, lots of research you can do. They're all electrically powered. So if your electricity is 100% renewable, then these are 100% green. Then if you look moving on to the sort of, if you decide that the sort of system like that one or that one is okay, but it is not okay at all, or is only partially okay. Some people like to have pew heaters or infrared heaters as a supplement to a kind of background heaters. Or if for some reason the powers that be have said that your church fabric needs to be kept at a certain temperature or whatever, and you have to use a boiler. One of the ones that is sometimes, one of the ideas that is sometimes propagated is a biomass boiler. Biomass boilers work by they burn little tiny kind of compressed wood pellets or wood, special grasses and things that are grown for that. I personally feel that these are not, in my book, really sustainable, even if your biomass comes from supposedly sustainably managed forests or sustainably managed land. That's fine. There's only, as long as there's only 3 or 4 churches in a county who are using this, it doesn't really matter. If we all went over to this, we absolutely could not grow enough biomass to, certainly not sustainable in terms of getting it replaced. We couldn't grow enough to do this. The same applies to putting biomass boilers in at home. They tend to be very large, and actually finding a delivery chute, a place to put the delivery chute and to store the pellets is also quite problematical. So my personal view is that although technically people will say this is carbon neutral, I have my doubts, really. The most common most common means of heating, if you need a space heating, you need background heating, would be to use either air source or ground source heat pumps. I know these particular heat pumps don't look very, are a bit unsightly. You can build a bit of a kind of fence around them or a baffle around them, which I would have said these clearly need, but you can't put them into a shed because they need a good circulation of air, obviously coming through them in order to actually do the heating. But speaking of somebody who has an air source heat pump at home and has had for 10 years probably, it's an extremely good way of heating. They're electrically powered, obviously, so if your source of power, your source of electricity is renewable, then they are a green source of energy. And the only thing about both ground source and air source heat pumps is that they heat the water to, generally speaking, a rather lower temperature than a conventional gas or oil fired boiler, which means that you probably need rather larger radiators in your space that you're trying to heat, or you need more of the radiators. So if you were to install a system like this, you might find that it's not just about putting in the air source heat pump or the ground source heat pump and connecting it up to your existing system. You might find, as we did at home, that you have to install either more radiators, or you have to replace some of your existing radiators with bigger radiators or whatever. Or, of course, if you're happy to have a rather lower level of background heat and you supplement it with the infrared heaters of some sort, or under pew under pew heaters of some sort, then you could have the two systems working together. This is where it starts to get quite complicated, and each situation, each context is different, and this to my mind, this is where you need somebody who knows what they're doing to give you advice. If you've got somebody, that's great, but I would still want to, my view would be it's helpful to have some professional advice here. And then a ground source heat pump, of course, there are two sorts of ground source heat pumps. One where they circulate a glycol mix through the boreholes, and one where you're taking heat directly out of the rock or the soil or the water that's directly in the ground. Either way, you need somewhere to put the intake, either boreholes that you either bore down into the below the church or below the churchyard, and you put boreholes at various places and then connect them up at the surface, or you dig up an area of field or whatever and you lay zigzags of piping in there, which is where the heat is drawn from the pipes. The difficulties of putting a ground source heat pump in a churchyard are obvious, you know, because clearly if it's a graveyard, you've got all sorts of issues, whether you're putting boreholes or whether I mean, trying to dig up a large area is just a non-starter for most churches. So mostly that is not, there's some churches have, I mean, this one obviously is, I don't know where it is, it's not Cornwall, I don't think, but the particular situation of your church may mean that it's suitable for it, but probably most churches, I suspect, would not be suitable. The same thing applies, however, to ground source heat pumps in terms of the radiators and so on. You may need to put some slightly bigger radiators in, or have a supplementary system just to turn on to take the chill off, as it were. The only other one I want to mention is you may hear reference to, I'll stop sharing. You may hear reference to hydrogen boilers, or to when we get hydrogen coming in. Now that'll only apply to anybody who's able to be on mains gas, is the first thing to say. And there has been talk of gradually being able to sort of put in some more bits on your boiler, and then the gas companies will actually put some hydrogen into as a mix with the gas, and gradually sort of convert the boilers over to burning hydrogen. Again, at the conference I went to, we had a presentation all about this, and here we are. Firstly, the technology for that is not fully available yet, and secondly, I mean, the comment made by the person who was giving the presentation was waiting for hydrogen technology is a bad excuse for doing nothing. And the hydrogen anyway is not a very efficient way of turning electricity into heat. You do better, and he showed us a diagram that showed this. I'm sorry, I haven't got it to show you, but sometimes to use renewable energy to produce hydrogen uses approximately, or can use approximately 8 times as much electrical energy as it would take if you were doing it directly using it directly with an air source heat pump. So using the hydrogen technology, even if it was available, is not the most efficient way of doing things. So certainly the received wisdom with the way things are at the minute as far as hydrogen technology is concerned is, you know, you can forget that, stick with the ones that I've already mentioned. Yeah, I think probably that's sort of more or less all I wanted to say specifically. Again, let's just pause now and perhaps have more questions and comments that may have occurred to you over what I've just said. Claire.
Hi, it is the Schmidt under pew seat pads which we are going to have fitted. They will also put, we're having some pews out from the front of the church, and we'll have a more open space and children can sit, or we can have some chairs there. We are going to have heated pads under the carpet, so they can do that as well, where you've got chairs. We investigated having the under pew heating as well, and that would have used a great deal more electricity to run, which we would have had. Well, we have in fact had 3-phase put in, but it did tip us from 2-phase into needing 3-phase. We've been lucky in that it was not very expensive for us to do that, because the distance from this supply pole outside, we haven't had to go underground. It could be done over ground, but that's pretty unusual and quite huge. So that was just, I wanted to comment.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you for reminding me about the 3-phase thing, because quite a number of these, certainly any of the heat pumps, will need 3-phase electricity, and that is an issue in terms of it's something to be investigated at an early stage. Yes, Ben.
And I think it's worth, with both air source and ground source, the reality is what you're looking at doing is you're achieving temperatures, flow temperatures, so in your heating system of around 35 degrees, and a domestic heating system achieves flow temperatures of 60 degrees and upwards. So it's a much lower temperature scenario, and this comes back to insulate. And so often with the majority of our heritage buildings and older churches, insulating the space is one, nearly impossible, and two, the heights we're talking about, because these were soaring buildings, for the glory of God, are very difficult. So what's interesting, certainly if you look at the Schmidt side of things, they give some very good and helpful examples, like the National Basilica in Slovakia, where it's -10 for weeks at a time, and they've gone with this system. And indeed a chapel in Northumbria, which is the highest church in England, which regularly goes under snow, and they've run this system now for about 8 years, in fact. And the observation is it's very simple and very effective, and very flexible. So I think for a lot of us, air source and ground source, whilst being heralded as the new heating, that's great in a domestic setting. I think it's very hard to make it work well in a church setting. Well,
I mean, again, this is why I say again, one needs to take advice about this and think about it and plan it carefully, because I think, I mean, I was just thinking as Claire was talking about the children moving about at the front of the church, not before time in Devon Church, I have to say, Claire, how wonderful, having done all age services in that church on a number of occasions. But it's fine for people who are sitting in the pews, but all those little people running about, I've got no, I mean, yes, okay, they're running about, they've got their own heating systems within them up to a point. But, you know, if it's a freezing temperature, and everywhere is a freezing temperature, then, I mean, again, Devon Church is quite small. It's quite intimate. I mean, one of the things that one might want to do is to actually measure the temperatures, produce a graph of how the temperatures relate within your church, in different places in your church, relate to the temperature outside, because some churches will respond to rises and falls of temperature quite quickly, and others will respond more slowly, or indeed, you know, different places of the church will respond in different ways. So again, this is one of the things why one needs to be doing one's research first. I mean, I completely understand, Ben, in terms of heating the people and the pew heaters and so on, but if you haven't got any pews, or if you're a big church like the cathedral, or like some of our churches where you've got a big space, it's used a lot of the day, a lot of the time, you know, that it's open every day of the week, people come in for whatever, and indeed maybe moving about, maybe doing things, maybe doing classes, community activities in there, that may be less practical to use personal heating systems, if you like, whether it's under pews or whether it's cushions you sit on or whatever. So again, that comes back to what I've said earlier in terms of think about what you're going to do, how you're going to use this, who are the people you're going to heat, and when do you want to heat them. Miranda.
Yeah, sorry, me again. We're just about to put in a faculty application. Amongst other things, what we're hoping to do is to section off a small side chapel in the church and have underfloor heating in there only.
Good.
The problem we've come up against, it's been designed by my husband, who's a retired heating engineer, which he's just popping into the video, sorry. The problem he's come up against is that the side chapel is actually relatively small, even though it's high, and it's difficult to find an air source heat pump which is small enough, which
okay.
So what we're proposing is to have a couple of radiators run off that one, one to heat a very cold area right up by the altar, and one to put in the new toilet area that we're hoping for. But it's a bit of a semi-bodged solution. We're still not quite sure, but it was the problem that you said about children crawling around on the floor. So
yes, absolutely. And actually, interestingly, that's also reminded me of one of the solutions that was in discussion at the conference I went to, is that to have a kind of chapel, a small area off the side. Is it possible to put some kind of a ceiling over your side chapel so that, I mean, you know, again, is this Camborne Parish Church?
No, St Sampson's South Hill near Callington.
Oh, sorry, no, well, it's not a church, I know then, sorry.
Tiny little rural one. We hope to, because the side chapel ceiling is a 1870s Victorian one, and originally when the DAC came, they suggested that we possibly could lower it very slightly and put insulation in, but they've changed their mind. They've said no, we can't. So that's that.
When did they say that to you?
Well, when they said the original that we could, that was 2 or 3 years ago, but they came more recently, within the last 6 months, and said no.
It might be worth reading those new faculty jurisdiction rules.
True.
Because that I pointed up to you, because that's coming in July this year. That's and they are not, you know, it doesn't necessarily give the green light to do absolutely anything we like, so long as it cuts the carbon. But there's a much stronger steer now that they have to follow about how do we cut the carbon. And if you're making a proposal that is going to cut carbon emissions, and they are saying no, you can't do, or is going to work into cutting the carbon emissions, they're under much more pressure now to actually give you, if they're going to turn it down, they need, I think, to give you much better reasons. They still can turn it down, of course they can, and there may well be reasons why in your particular context they can't do that. But yes, having a little kind of refuge area for children, babies to be crawling around on the floor and not getting too cold, or indeed for some of the more elderly and infirm people, you know, maybe that might be they might be better. I know it kind of hives people off at the side, and you need to think about visibility and how they participate in services and so on, all of these things. That's why it's so important to have this think the whole thing through first approach that I've been talking about. Ben.
Great. Well, I'm going to have to jump in, friends, because we have 5 minutes to spare. And there are a couple of items that I'd like to share. But firstly, thank you, Elly, for sharing from that conference you were away at, and for sharing your information in that. I'm sure that's got our minds thinking and stirring. I am just reminded, actually, the other Saturday, my son was playing in a hockey match in a freezing, horrible day, and the man next to me was wearing a heated body warmer. So he had a simple lightweight gilet on, which had a battery pack hidden in it somewhere. Brilliant. And it was just the badge was glowing on it. And I said, what is that? And he told me about it. And I thought, gosh, that would be great. But there are all sorts of avenues that are yet to come and yet to be discovered.
Absolutely.
But it's having a church will and a gathering that we are achieving and saying we need to take these actions, and then discovering how we're going to do that together. So bless you. Thank you. A couple of things for your radar. Firstly, this Saturday, we are pilgrimaging from Hubert down to Holywell and through there for the afternoon. And we're gathering at 10 o'clock at Hubert, or slightly earlier if you want to be punctual. But we'd love to have you come along. And if anybody wants to come to that, please do email Rosie and let her know that you're coming. That would be incredibly helpful, just so we can balance numbers. I'm going to be there. I know Elly will be there. I think Bishop Hugh is joining us.
Yes, he is.
So do come to that. It will be just a great opportunity to be together, to walk. It looks like great weather for Saturday.
The weather does look very encouraging. Dogs are allowed.
Yes.
Bring your doggy if you want. My doggy will be there.
There you go. And then a couple of things to highlight as well. On the 5th of November, bells ring out for climate. COP27, there is a national initiative where all the bells across the country are being invited to ring out as a symbol of climate crisis as we approach COP27. I will make sure that the details of that are included in the newsletter next week. There are also a number of key webinars coming up over the next few weeks regarding net zero and the now approved route map. So I'll include those in the newsletter too. And then just to say that our next gathering is on November the 3rd, and we have Katrine Musgrave coming from Christian Aid, talking about their role and response within climate crisis, both nationally and internationally, and particularly about speaking out and speaking up and lobbying, and how we actually work together as a force for good to change both political and public opinion. So those are kind of the headlines of things coming up. There'll be more included in the newsletter. If there's any last minute things that anyone thinks, oh gosh, we haven't spoken about this or shared, pop your hand up and tell me now. Bless you. So once again, thank you all for coming. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for all that you are doing in your churches and communities. It really is making a difference. Just gathering together in the cathedral on Sunday, it was inspiring to hear of the changes and see the communities coming together. So thank you for this. I believe it is a genuinely missional opportunity in our church. The world and our communities are utterly engaged in this, and the church has a role to play in this, and an important part in cementing the community together with this. So as we end, I'm just going to pray, and then I'll leave you to your days. So let's pause for a moment. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for this world, our home, your creation. We thank you for all the endeavours that are moving forward to bring about climate justice, to help us work toward a net zero balancing act. We know it's hard. We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the tools. And sometimes it feels like we don't have all the resources. But amongst us, there is a will and a desire to make this change and to lead the way. So would you equip us and enable us, bring people into our communities, enable us to be a source of change and energy within the church that really does help lead the way in this, that we might see a wonderful reflourishing of your creation and indeed of our church communities. We ask this in your name. Amen. Well, bless you, friends. Thank you for all that you are doing. Have a great few weeks, and we will see you in November. Anything you need support with, please do remember you can email me or Rosie or indeed Elly, and all of us are keen and able and willing to support you in as far as we can. God bless.